Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jim Parenti. I'm a Senior Associate Dean here at Columbia's School of International and Public Affairs, and I'm delighted to welcome you to SIPA. I specifically want to thank all of the student organizations that have played a critical role in helping us formulate this event today, as well as the Diversity Task Force, which is, of course, led by Professor and Mayor Michael Nutter, as well as our student organizations that have been participating in the diversity events throughout the year. The election of Donald Trump as president and the re-election of a Republican-controlled House and Senate could usher in sweeping change to the nation's policy course and potentially reorient the United States position on the world stage. Some changes can be accomplished by the Trump White House on its own, while others will require congressional approval. On immigration, President-elect Trump has said he would sharply curtail the refugee flow and embark on a nationwide crackdown on illegal immigration. President-elect Trump has promised to start construction of a wall across the southwest border, a signature proposal of his campaign. He said he would quickly cancel a program President Obama put in place by executive action that gave protection from deportation and work permits to about 800,000 undocumented immigrants who came to the United States first as children. The president-elect has also said he would permanently cancel a broader protection program for undocumented immigrants that Mr. Obama tried to carry out that was blocked by the courts. He has also said he will initiate a campaign to deport within the first year of his presidency what he described as up to 2 million undocumented immigrants with criminal records. The president-elect has also threatened to punish sanctuary cities, which have curbed their cooperation with immigration officials by withholding their federal funding. These issues and others have created an uncertainty on U.S. immigration policy and will serve as a discussion point for our conversation here today. We are joined by an outstanding panel of leaders on the issue of U.S. immigration, and we are honored that they could join us here at Columbia today. They are Elora Mukherjee, the director of Columbia University Law School Immigration Rights Clinic, Mr. Albert Fox Cahn, director of strategic litigation for the New York chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations, Mr. Stephen Choi, the executive director of the New York Immigration Coalition, Ms. Aracelis Lucero, executive director of the Mexican American Students Alliance, and Mr. Domenic Powell, advocacy and policy strategist at the American Civil Liberties Union. Moderating our panel today is the Honorable Michael Nutter, the former mayor of Philadelphia, and the David N. Dinkins Professor of Political and Professional Practice in Urban and Public Affairs here at SIPA. Please join me in welcoming Mayor Michael Nutter.
Dean Parenti, thank you very, very much. And it is certainly for me a great honor to be a part of this particularly distinguished panel. I want to thank all of the sponsoring groups and organizations, but just at a personal level, I want to thank Tiffany for asking me to be a part of this, and certainly John Fye and Damien and the many other leaders who are very much a part of this discussion and putting this program together. What I'd like to do is I have been assisted tremendously in putting some questions together, and I'd like to get through those, but have a real conversation. So I'm kind of like a referee. The best referees are ones that you never really notice in the course of a contest or a game, but I do want to keep the conversation moving. There might be follow-up questions, et cetera, et cetera. But maybe the first is, notwithstanding the great introductions by Dean Parenti, if I could ask everyone to maybe briefly talk about your organization, your role, and in the organization, and certainly how the organization relates to immigration policy and advocacy and representation. So with that, Elora?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Elora Mukherjee. I teach at Columbia Law School. I'm an associate clinical professor of law. I direct the Immigrants' Rights Clinic at the law school. And our clinic offers law students an opportunity to represent individuals facing removal, so individuals facing deportations, as well as work with community and nonprofit organizations on strategic planning and policy advice. Our individual clients are both adults and children. They're both in detention and they're non-detained, and they're spread out across 4 states: Texas, Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey. A significant part of our work is along the southern border at the detention center that is holding refugee families, mothers and children who are asylum seekers.
Thank you all for having me. My name is Albert Cahn. I'm with CARE New York, the New York chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations. For those of you who don't know, CARE is the largest Muslim civil rights group in the country. At CARE New York, we seek to advocate on behalf of the nearly 1 million Muslims living in New York State. There are approximately 30 CARE chapters around the country in about 25 states, and we're constantly growing to meet the growing needs of the Muslim community. We advocate on a wide variety of civil rights issues, including immigration matters, national security, surveillance, police abuses, but also employment civil rights, anti-bullying initiatives, and generally promoting a positive image of Muslim Americans and Islam. In the New York office, we have a limited direct advocacy role on immigration, where we represent individuals in passport revocation cases. We have a growing number of immigration specialties we're bringing on board, and we also are growing our pro bono co-counseling arrangement with area law firms. We also have a broad advocacy role in promoting policies that respect the rights of Muslim American immigrants who have systemically faced greater scrutiny and at times abuses from not just the current administration, but prior administrations. Given the election, we expect this role to only increase in coming years.
Stephen.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Steve Choi. I'm the Executive Director of the NYSC. Very proud to be here. I'm very happy to be here. We boast several SIPA graduates on our staff. That's a good thing. So the New York Immigration Coalition is an umbrella agency for about 175 member agencies across New York State. We're very happy and proud to count MASA New York as one of our member agencies. And our member agencies run the gamut. We have grassroots community groups, we have legal service providers, labor unions, academic institutions, but our bread and butter is the grassroots community organizations that are directly providing services and organizing immigrant community members in all the different neighborhoods. And our membership really reflects the diversity of New York's immigrant communities. New York is very different in this regard. It's very unique in this regard. About 34% of New York's immigrant population is Latino, much less than states like California or Texas. About 26% are Asian. 20% are black immigrants from the Caribbean or from Africa. Significant numbers of Middle Eastern immigrants as well as European immigrants, which is a tremendous strength because in so many ways it is a harbinger of what the future of America looks like, but it's also an interesting challenge as well. Our membership also spans the geographic breadth of New York State as well. A lot of people just assume that New York City is where all of New York's immigrants are. The fact of the matter is there are more than 1 million immigrants that live outside of New York City. And I think a lot of times when we talk about immigrants in New York State, we just think about immigrants in New York City, but the situations that immigrants face, that refugees face outside of New York City is vastly different. And I think that's a political reality that we are very cognizant of because we're a statewide organization.
Aracelis?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So first, I am a former SIPA graduate from class 2012, so I'm very happy to be here. Thank you. And well, what is MASA? I'm very proud to be leading MASA because MASA actually was a student-founded organization. And as we all know, a lot of the progress that has been made around immigration has been very youth-led. And so I'm very proud that I get to lead and represent an organization that that really had courage to step up to the plate. And in 2001, it was founded by a group of undocumented immigrants, mostly Mexican students, and hence the name Mexican American Students Alliance. We're no longer students. We've kind of grown up, unfortunately. But we still have a focus on education, and I think a lot of the research shows that for immigrant families and those who are undocumented, it does lead to very different outcomes, just status alone. And so while we focus on education and promoting the educational attainment of Mexicans in particular, because there's a huge dropout rate and a lot of foreign-born Mexicans aren't going to college, it is equally important to us to address the family issues. And for us, not having status provides true barriers, not only for the parents, but also for the children that are under their care. And so we don't see ourselves doing this work without addressing that issue. About 90% of the families that we serve are undocumented. And so we consider ourselves a hybrid organization doing direct services, but also partnering and being part of coalitions like the New York Immigrant Coalition on two issues, right? Immigration and being able to advance policies that benefit our families and that make the city much friendlier to immigrant families, but also on the educational level, right? Making sure that parents understand immigrant rights and that they're not afraid and that they have language access.
Dominic.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Domenic Powell with the American Civil Liberties Union. We're nearly 100 years old, and our goal is to defend the civil rights and civil liberties of all people in the United States, including immigrants. We do that in court through our Immigrants' Rights Project and in every state capital and in Congress. My role with the ACLU is to give a lot of direction to that state work, including lobbying, campaigning, and organizing.
Okay. Thank you all. Maybe to get things started, I'd like to get your perspective on either at least current immigration policy to the extent that we have any semblance of a rational immigration policy at, of course, this national, state, and local levels. But I'd like to get your perspective on any one or two, a few things that you would either like to see implemented or removed with regard to current immigration policy in the United States of America. And that's now just in whatever order you want to answer, and let's get a good conversation going.
Just go down the line.
Assume we all will go.
So as I mentioned in the introduction, a lot of the work I do is on behalf of detained immigrants. A lot of the work that my students do is on behalf of detained immigrants. And there is a very unknown provision of federal law, which is known as the Immigration Detention Bed Mandate. So the Department of Homeland Security's appropriations depends on the Department of Homeland Security having 34,000 beds in immigration detention available on any given day. If the Department of Homeland Security doesn't have that many beds available in detention, then it will not receive appropriations, funding from Congress. And this detention bed mandate is in the civil context. So people don't, I think, often realize how absurd it is. It's a fixed number. It's not related to how many immigrants are coming into the country. It's not related to the number of immigrants committing crime. Most of the immigrants who fill those detention beds have not been charged with any crime. They are civil offenders whose only offense is being undocumented. And For those who are in immigration detention and who are facing removal or deportation proceedings, the protections that are available in the criminal justice context do not apply. There is no right to a lawyer. There's no right to a government-appointed lawyer. So both adults and children who are facing removal proceedings, facing deportation, must litigate their cases themselves from a detention context, which is extremely difficult to do. And it is something that I think should be changed. The detention bed mandate came into law in 2009. The biggest proponents of the detention bed mandate, as you can imagine, are the private for-profit prison corporations that have just seen their stock prices soar with the expanding immigration detention beds. And the two companies most responsible for this detention bed mandate are CCA, formerly known as the Corrections Corporation of America. They're trying to undergo an image change, and now they have a new name that incorporates the word civil instead of corrections, and the GEO Group, which is the nation's second largest for-profit prison corporation.
It's difficult for me to say there's one specific legal mandate that CARE New York would want to have removed. Instead, what I'd like to focus on.
You can give us a few.
No, I just want to focus instead on the systemic bias we see in the immigration context against Muslim Americans, and oftentimes, but not exclusively, Muslim American men who are viewed through a national security lens, so that the most innocuous choices can result in them being flagged, result in them being investigated, result in their passports being revoked, result in their green cards being denied. And really, at every step along the way, we see Muslim Americans paying a price for their faith and really effectively being punished for that. And the difficulty with this is there is no one provision to fix. It's rather a systemic change we need to see within our broader immigration system, including the Department of Homeland Security and the State Department.
Mayor, you mentioned the assumption that there was a semblance of a rational policy around immigration. There is no such semblance. There's nothing like a rational policy for immigration. I just want to make sure that's really clear.
I want to make sure in my comment that I meant that we don't have
Yes.
a rational system if we had one.
Yes. Okay. And I'm in total agreement with you there, because our immigration system is fundamentally, irretrievably broken. I'll just give a couple examples. Right now, if you come from a certain country, let's say the Philippines or Mexico, and you want to be reunited with one of your family members, I love it when people say, oh, people should just get in line. Well, some of these lines are more than 20 years long. If you want to get reunited with your family member, you're going to wait 20 years. That's not rational in any sense of the word. And in fact, one of the big drivers of immigration without papers is actually the fact that the avenues for legal immigration are so tightly restricted. And I hear so many people say, well, when my grandparents came, they waited in line just like everybody else. There was no line back then. In fact, before 1924, I believe, you could just show up. You could just show up to Ellis Island, and you would go through an inspection, and if you didn't have any, communicable diseases, and you weren't, you were basically just let into the country. So the idea that everybody used to wait in line, but now people are not waiting in line, that's a ridiculous argument. I'll give you another example of our crazy immigration system. If you lapse your status for just one day, let's say you come over with your family, you are relying on your grandmother who is a citizen to be able to give your family status, and let's say she passes away. A situation that actually befell one of our former clients at one of my organizations. Then you're faced with a choice. Well, we've come here, we've actually left everything behind, we've moved here, we put down roots here. Now, all of a sudden, our avenue to legal immigration is gone, and their status lapsed. Now, in 1996, in the last sort of anti-immigrant cataclysm that we faced, they passed all these laws to crack down on immigration. It just made it harder for people to leave. And so now, if your status is lapsed and you're undocumented, and you try to reapply again, well, you will actually be barred from coming back for 3 or more likely 10 years. So what does that mean? That means you're not going to leave. So all of these kinds of measures that people have put into place, this kind of apparatus that people have put onto a failing system, has just made it worse. I could go on, but the fact is that we have a fundamentally broken system. And the problem is that all of the wrong things are being highlighted as the fact that it's broken. Donald Trump got elected on basically saying that the border was being overrun by smugglers. That's completely false. In fact, there's more outflow now from certain countries than there is inflow. So the idea that you could actually create a wall is pure fancy. And I don't have to go into the details about it. And the idea that 2 or 3, he just recently said that there are 2 or 3 million criminal undocumented immigrants that he's going to round up and deport. It's simply false. So, I can go on, but I think the fact of the matter is we need immigration reform, but we don't need more militarization of the border. We don't need more enforcement of undocumented immigrants. What we need is a rational rethinking of the system, but I don't know if we're going to see that in the next 4 to 8 years.
Aracelis?
Thank you. So, there's 2 things that are definitely I'm aligned with here with the priorities and what, the policy changes should be. And one of them, for sure, is the way that we treat our families in the detention centers. There was a big win in Texas recently where they released about 400 children and women to a facility, to a nonprofit who had a place for them to stay, and it was because of the inhumane conditions. And so filling up the beds is not like the right way to treat our families and to have them. There's people who have died in detention centers. They call it the ice box. We serve immigrant children, unaccompanied minors, and who are in New York City schools today who have huge trauma because of that experience. And so it's certainly, that definitely has to change because it affects them when they get here. And the second thing that I definitely want to piggyback on, and that I'm very happy that we're trying to preserve DACA and trying to protect the dreamers. But I also think that we miss the point when we don't realize that they're in mixed status families, right? And so when we're not addressing the problem for their parents or for their relatives, we're only placing more burden on these young people. And yes, we've had some positive outcomes around higher income levels, reaching higher levels of education, upward mobility. But at the same time, we are restricting these young people from really achieving their full potential because they still have to worry about their family and they still have to put up a significant amount of money for their families to try to go through the line or an immigration process that simply doesn't exist for them. And so I think that really for us it's improving the quality of life of all immigrants here and not just the 800,000 dreamers or DACA recipients, but the 11.5 million people that it doesn't seem that even are remotely close to getting something that will benefit them in the next couple of years.
Domenic, I was going to, Aracelis is prescient because the next question was actually going to be about Dreamers and DACA, and I was going to ask you on the next go-around to start with that. So if we could get into that conversation as well, I'd appreciate it.
Just in general about the topic of DACA?
And your concerns, and really what would you, from a personal experience here, the day after the election, and the subsequent days when SIPA and the entire university had a variety of programs and events for students who were very upset for any number of reasons, not just because of how the election went, but things that have been said during the course of the campaign. There are a number of folks who are worried as to what the future may bring. And so what would you say to those young people, but also students who are right here at the university, at SIPA, who are in that kind of status? What kinds of things are we suggesting, recommending to those young people at this point?
Well, it's pretty ironic because last year we were given a grant and we're part of the Mexican Initiative for Deferred Action Project, where we were actively seeking out to support and provide immigration help for DACA specifically. And I remember when that came as an opportunity, And I just sat there and I was like, it'd be really like messed up if it were taken away one day. Like there were some actual fears about sharing information. And so we always told DACA applicants that it was really their choice, that there was no way that we could tell whether in the future somebody, if the Republicans won, whether they would use this information, but that we knew that there were a lot of advocates who were fight against, that information being used in an improper way. And so fast forward, it's almost like bad, waking up from a bad dream. And as an organization, I think we feel a huge responsibility to these DACA recipients who definitely are afraid. We have staff, a significant amount of our staff. They have amazing talent and are like probably the best people to serve our community. But yeah, it's a reality. We're waiting to hear what happens January 20th. We might lose some staff, hopefully not. There's been so much back and forth, and there's been some like positive light in the last couple of days about the Dreamers, but who knows? We don't know, and so it's really hard to tell them. But again, we reiterate that there are a lot of people that are fighting, and really they have stepped up to the plate. They're not going to go down without a fight, and so we just want to make sure that every organization that has been a part of the coalition, that has been advocating, like really comes out in force and do as much as possible to protect them. But really also to be cautious. Like there's a lot of sessions that legal service providers are doing about staying safe. Don't get any criminal records. Don't start a fight. Like it's really about waiting right now and just trying to keep yourself under the radar and make sure you talk to lawyers that can help you if something has transpired since you last got your DACA.
Go ahead. Or anyone else wants to jump into that particular issue?
Well, on the specific issue of undocumented youth and immigrant families generally, you want to be able to tell people that it's okay, particularly when they're scared and they feel tremendous threat. But at the same time, there's a very good chance that things are not going to be okay, and you don't want to give people a false sense of security. Eventually, young people, and many of them already have, be forced to confront the ugliness of families being divided, of deportation, of this ugliness that millions of people voted for to hem in their lives. And undocumented youth have already done a lot to show that the right way you meet this is organizing, that you need to fight back, you need to hold people to account and make the case that something is unjust and that we need to move on as a country. On the earlier question about if there's a one policy that would make things better, I sympathize with my colleagues here about not trying to not wanting to pick a magic wand, because there isn't one, and the issues that immigrants face are interwoven with the issues that all communities of color face, or of over-policing, of mass incarceration, and so forth. But if there was one fix that I thought would do a lot of good, it would be nationwide to make it the exception rather than the rule that local law enforcement are involved in immigration enforcement, and requiring immigration agents to have a warrant every time that they want local law enforcement to hold someone on their behalf.
Sure, go ahead.
I would just say very briefly, the situation and the plight of DACA recipients is heartbreaking. I think back 4 years ago when the DACA program was first announced, and they started taking applications in September of 2012. And the organization that I was at, I was practicing as an attorney at a time, We had clinics open every single night, every day of the weekend, working with these folks, working with young, undocumented DACA-eligible folks to actually apply for this status. And I had that conversation with every single one of them. I said, I want you to understand that there are risks there. And I told them that because it was my legal responsibility to tell them about the risks, that potentially there could be an administration that would go after them. But even at that time in 2012, I never imagined that a President Romney would actually really do that. And that was kind of the worst case scenario at the time. Now I would give anything for President Romney because there's a legitimate chance that with Jeff Sessions as the AG, with Donald Trump as the president, with Chris Kobach behind the scenes, some of the most ideologically virulent people that you will find in this country around immigration, there's a real chance that people are going to be in danger. That ICE may take people's demographic information and go after them and try to deport them. That is a real live possibility. And so we are actually counseling people that, if you're looking to renew it, you may not want to renew it. Or you're going to waste the money if your application is going to get processed by a Trump administration, and you may not want to give them updated address information. Never thought I would be giving this advice, never thought we would be having this conversation, but we are. But it is at risk. I'm not going to beat around the bush. President Trump could sign an executive order on day one in a matter of weeks that immediately takes away the ability to work legally, the ability to be protected from deportation, and all these other benefits to have access to health care. So this is a coming human catastrophe. And the other alternative for President Trump is he could simply step back and say, I'm not going to dismantle the program, but everybody who has these 2-year permits, I'm just going to let them lapse. And that is going to be no less of a catastrophe because that all happens by January 2019 than by January 2017. So I just want to say that this is one of the most critical, the most urgent and pressing issues that we need to be focusing on right now and not wait until January 20th or 19th or wherever he's going to be another.
Elora, you jumped up to your microphone.
So since the election, I have been meeting with our DACA students on campus, our undocumented students on campus, undergraduates, graduate students, and these are heartbreaking conversations. These are the students who have done everything right at every step of their lives to make it to this point and to make it here at Columbia. And now they're facing the prospect of losing everything that they have worked their entire lives for, everything that their parents have worked their entire lives for. So what am I telling them? I'm telling them to be prepared. I'm telling them to speak with immigration lawyers and try to figure out if they're eligible for other forms of immigration relief. 13 to 14% of DACA recipients turn out to be eligible for some other form of immigration relief. So when I find students among those who I've met who do seem to be eligible for forms of relief, I'm placing their cases with pro bono lawyers. I'm advising every student to have a safety plan. What does that mean? In practical terms, it means taking out a sheet of paper and writing down on your sheet of paper the names and phone numbers of every person who you might contact in case you are caught up in an immigration raid. It means listing your close family members, your friends, your children's school information, and putting it on that sheet of paper. Because in immigration detention, it's easier to pull out a sheet of paper. Your phone will be taken away, as will everything else on your person, and you'll be given a prison uniform. I'm asking every student to put together their important personal paperwork, their birth certificates, their passports, their school records, anything that establishes their identity and what's in the law called positive equities, the things that show that they're a good person. I'm asking them to put all of this paperwork in one place in their home, organized in a folder, and I'm recommending that at least one person outside of their household has access to this information so that they can pull it out in case the student ends up in immigration detention. And then third, for the parents who are undocumented, I'm advising that each of them think about who will take care of their children in the event that they are caught up in an immigration raid. And I'm going one step further and advising parents to think about executing a power of attorney that will specify who would take care of their children in the event that they are caught up in an immigration raid, so that their child doesn't end up in the state foster care system.
Stephen, I know you wanted to speak on this.
So we're in a place that none of us imagined we'd be several months ago, and there's a lot of uncertainty, but I think we need to avoid the temptation to assume that every problematic promise made in the course of this campaign will actually be enacted. We know some of them physically can't be, and there's some where we hope that prudence and political pressure will force the administration to reconsider. So I've seen so much fear in the communities we've served. I've seen so much dread, and at times I almost see cynicism about the political process at this moment, given the setback. And one of the most important things is for people to continue to engage and to seek every opportunity to apply pressure to make sure that we can push back against some of the scenarios we see on the table. One thing that I wanted to point out that's important is just the value of federalism. The state rights that Republicans have championed for generations are one of the most valuable safeguards for undocumented individuals here in New York. We have leaders on the state and local level who have made it quite clear that they will not allow local law enforcement to become the vanguard of a deportation force. And that is an incredible, valuable safety net for many folks. That is not going to be able to reverse the decisions of a Trump administration, but it does provide some additional protections for individuals in New York.
I'm going to try to be a good referee and but just share a couple of thoughts and concerns. First and foremost, from everything that you have all now said on this particular topic, it is so crystal clear that cities across the United States of America themselves probably should be making plans, along with many of you, as to how the governments, the local governments, are going to deal with these particular issues. And it was already stated at another forum during the week of the election by President Bollinger that the university is also exploring the same kind of planning for how to deal with these circumstances. But in another forum, as I pointed out, while there are certain protections, certainly for students on campus, our students here and across the country are not always on campus and will not always have those protections available to them. The third is, from Elora's description, I mean, it is heartbreaking, the more and more I think about this, that, I mean, it almost appears that we're in a different country at this point in time, that people have to worry about these kinds of things, but we do, and I don't know what's going to happen. There's rhetoric and then there's reality, and there's a big blurring of the lines at the moment. But it seems to me that one of our most powerful weapons, and this was effective in the civil rights movement, it was effective out of the Vietnam War, and it's continued to be effective, which is the use of media to communicate. I think, as Elora laid it out, I think if more Americans understood what really happens in this process of families potentially being ripped apart, that students are worried that they're going to get snatched up, that folks have to actually write down all of this information that, I don't really have to worry much about, even if I were arrested for whatever I might be arrested for. This is at another level. And so I think serious exposure to the broader American public and people around the world to understand what this could be. And because we're in a moment of uncertainty, we don't know. But taken to its extreme, and the work that you all do in collaboration with many, many others, cities across America should start to prepare. There will be pressure on the justice side about grants that come from Justice and DHS to try to force local law enforcement to do the job of the feds. And mayors and officials and all those folks will have to decide whether they want to deal with that pressure. But money can be taken away or denied if you are not cooperating in this regard. So that might not happen in New York City or some other places, but there are a lot of cities across America. There are 18,000 police departments in the United States of America. And so for some, 100,000, $1 million, $5 million could be a lot of money, and you start to go down a pretty slippery slope. That'll be my longest comment for the day. I'm back to being a referee. But you had your hand.
Yeah,
Jump in,
I would.
please. This
go ahead.
is a conversation.
I would just quickly say that I think actually New York could be potentially at risk. You know, the Trump administration and the folks there have made quite clear that they're willing to at least use the threat of pulling federal funding to punish New York City's status as a quote-unquote sanctuary city. And the city comptroller did an analysis and said that basically if the federal government decided to pull all of its funding, it would be, I think, either $5 or $7 billion. So we're not talking about chump change here. And so I absolutely agree. I think that is a real threat that we need to be thinking about. And Jeff Sessions, when you look at his history, would not be a surprise if he decided to try to use some of that. I think the one silver lining is, in some ways, Donald Trump is going to get hoisted by his own petard. In talking about the numbers of immigrants, and I think that's one thing that's clear. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I think one thing that we're certain of is he's going to ramp up the deportation machine. There will be, and I think we can count on this, hundreds of thousands of people deported, families torn apart. That is a certainty. He is going to have to live up to some of that rhetoric. But the interesting thing is the only way that you can actually do that at scale, you simply can't go and do home invasions all the time. You're not going to get the numbers. You're not going to be able to deport 2 or 3 million. And the only places really, especially now because a lot of folks don't work in these big factories anymore, you're going to have to rely on the criminal justice system, which is where ICE does a lot of its work. They'll hang out outside, or they'll rely on the database, the shared database. And if you don't have the cooperation of cities like New York, where you have just a lot of immigrants, and you have a lot of everybody going through the criminal justice system, but you do have a lot of immigrants going through it. If you don't have their cooperation, you're not going to meet your numbers. So in some ways, I think that is going to be one of the quote-unquote Trump cards. Maybe that's the worst. That's not the best term here. But that is going to be something that I think New York City and cities like it are going to have in their favor in thinking about negotiating with the Trump administration around this federal funding and such.
Dominic?
I want to get into a couple things. I promise to do so quickly, Mayor Nutter. But you know, on this issue of defunding sanctuary cities, it's pretty complex. I mean, Trump has said a lot of things about it. He said a lot of them loudly, but how exactly it comes down to specifics is going to be, you know, it's not going to be as straightforward as it is, you know, as it is a talking point. There will definitely be attempts, you know, as was mentioned, to restrict particular grant programs like coming out of DOJ, especially when, you know, it's headed by somebody who's no friend to immigrants, Senator Sessions. Other programs that have been talked about are the community development block grant funding, and then other programs that are not really on the nose when it comes to immigration enforcement, including programs that fund community policing, other programs that fund, you know, things like law enforcement SWAT teams. And interestingly, you know, this issue might turn on the same, you know, concerns that prevented Medicaid expansion in many states, that the federal government is not going to be able to simply yank money from localities simply because they, you know, don't want to agree with a federal policy. I do want to say, though, that something that we're not thinking about, you know, or we don't have as centrally in our minds is the amount of preemption of local will that can happen at the state level. Many of these so-called sanctuary policies already faced threats from their state governments this year. We saw over, I want to say the final number was 36 bills in state legislatures this year that attempted to thwart sanctuary cities. And many of those were so expansive that they would have upended decades-old common sense police policy not to inquire about immigration status unless it's relevant to a state or local crime. So I just want to say, like, while there are, while the issue, like what the federal government can do to quote unquote punish sanctuary cities, it's kind of checkered, but we shouldn't forget that the state can do a lot as well. And considering that so many states are under single-party control, and many of those are Republican, they're not going to face a lot of political opposition at the state level when they try to do so.
Other thoughts in this area?
I just want to kind of sort of say something really briefly. I just want to dispel this myth that deportation and people going in detention in New York City has not been happening. It's been kind of sort of a learning experience to be able to go through that, and thank you. And it's what the scary part I think about all of this is that Obama has done a good job of setting up the deportation machine. And so while it took him about 8 years to do the same thing that Trump is saying he's going to do, I think that he's done a good job of setting up the pipeline for it. And there have been people who have been detained, and there have been families who have been separated. And so I just really want to bring us back to people really realizing that this has been happening in our city already, and this pressure around funding is what really might aggravate the situation. But I just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you.
And I'll just throw out one statistic to put that comment into context, and then I'm very sorry, I need to step out. So from 1892 to 1997, our nation deported 2.1 million immigrants. President Obama deported about as many immigrants in just his first 6 years in office. So the executive branch, the president, has tremendous power over immigration issues, and this is part of why I'm on the side of people right now who are cautioning those who are undocumented, those who are DACA recipients, to take every measure possible to protect themselves. And thank you for having me on this panel. I really appreciate it.
So please recognize Elora for her work. Let me raise two other issues that are not maybe directly associated with each other, but are major issues nonetheless. Resettlement programs in the United States, their future, as well as this now continued discussion around a potential Muslim registry and the prospects of that.
Well, as you might imagine, the idea of a Muslim registry is of immense concern to CARE and other Muslim civil rights groups. And sadly, there is a precedent for it. NSEERS was a program that this country implemented for, I believe, approximately 10 years following the attacks of 9/11. And this program required men to register if they were migrating from certain countries, which just happened to be all majority Muslim. They structured it by nationality to avoid some of the difficulties that would come with an explicit religious-based criteria. We don't know what's going to come next. Now, one possibility is the resumption of NSEERS itself, which was a truly traumatic experience for the Muslim American community that involved the detention of numerous men who simply went to register, and then their parents, their families didn't know where they were. There was no notification. They were in these immigration detention centers, and it really was like they were an Orwellian situation where they were swept away without any of the due process, without any of the transparency we would expect from the American criminal justice system, because It's not criminal. It's immigration. And thus, none of the rights very few of the rights we take for granted apply. So that's one possibility, a resumption of NSEERS. The other possibility is certain Republican figures, Chris Kobach and others, have suggested an expansion of that program to include specific questions about an individual's ideology. And I've seen reports with questions as broad as, do you support Sharia law? And that somehow being an exclusionary criteria. And the difficulty of this moment is we don't know where we're going. We don't know if we're simply going to see a step backwards or if we are truly going to see something unprecedented. And right now, CARE and other civil rights groups are really laying the groundwork for the legal challenges to fight back and do whatever we can to prevent this sort of registry. One of our biggest concerns is an attempt to register Muslim American citizens, because NSEERS and past attempts have been focused exclusively on individuals who were not citizens, who I believe green card holders were exempted too, but I'm not positive about that. And what we fear, particularly here in New York, a city that is engaged in very widespread surveillance of the Muslim community for 15 years, probably the broadest surveillance of any municipality in the country, is the convergence of an NSEERS-like program with the data that's been gathered by the NYPD Intelligence Bureau. With that data, to be clear, included all Muslim Americans, regardless of citizenship status. And so right now we're preparing for any of these eventualities.
I'll just talk very briefly about refugee resettlement, because during the campaign, that was another fact-free zone that the campaign just went into. You heard all sorts of allegations during the campaign. Muslim refugees are coming in here. We don't know what they're doing. We can't track them. They might be creating sleeper cells or terrorist cells somewhere. So a couple of facts, right? The United States has resettled about more than 700,000 refugees in the past 15 years. Three of them were charged with some kind of crime related to terrorism, and you could probably throw those three out. I mean, when you actually look at the details, it's ridiculous. So three of these folks, over the past 15 years, 700,000, you could actually make some kind of credible case that they were involved in some kind of terrorism action. So the idea that you need to all of a sudden implement, extreme vetting, what they call it, is ridiculous. And the crazy thing is, extreme vetting already exists. If you want to be resettled from Syria or some of these other countries, I can't tell you the number of steps that you have to go through to actually make it to the United States. Essentially, and this is just a quick summary of the process, you have to be referred by the United Nations Council on Refugees. You have to go through several rounds of in-country processing in whatever country you're trying to come from. They look at everything. They look at your social media accounts. They look at they do biometric screening. And then once you come to the United States, there's more rounds of screening. So the idea that people are coming here not screened is just complete. What's the word I'm looking for? That's PG-13 here. I mean, yeah, it's a complete falsity, right? And what's crazy is that other politicians picked up on that. In New York State, a couple of state legislators tried to pass a bill, mandating that refugees basically check in every once in a while, and would have required surveillance of refugees here in New York State. Ridiculous. And really, when you look at it, when you look at the United States and the way it has lived up to its responsibility, I think, and its history of taking refugees, Germany took in more than 1 million refugees from Syria and other countries. The United States has probably let in about 10,000. President Obama said that he would try to accept 100,000. And we are a country multiple magnitudes the size of Germany. So when you look at the United States in the broader global context, it's a complete dereliction of duty, of our responsibility, to be taking in as few refugees as we can. So those are the facts. The reality that we are living in today, though, is that facts don't matter. And so I think it's an absolute certainty that President Trump will put in some extreme restrictions on refugee resettlement. That's a fact. And I think, he's calling for extreme vetting, particularly for Muslim countries, and that's going to be a real problem. And he could also call for the complete defunding of the Office of Refugee Resettlement. There are a number of things that this president and this Congress can do that is going to strike a crippling blow to refugee resettlement programs in the United States. And let me tell you that that's a real problem, maybe not necessarily in New York City, but all these other places in the United States that accept refugees and see the value that they bring. The town of Watertown, up in North Country in New York State, just passed a resolution calling for the establishment of a refugee center in their midst. Why? Because they see that there are other towns and cities across upstate New York that have established refugee resettlement programs, and refugees come in, and guess what? They're positive. They stabilize neighborhoods. They contribute money to the tax base. They fill needed workforce jobs. They start small businesses. There are towns and cities that see the value of it, and they are the ones that are going to get hit the hardest when I think it's inevitable that the refugee resettlement program is crippled.
Domenic, Aracelis, thoughts
Yeah.
about this topic?
I'll be brief. Just to, I don't think what's on the table is the complete, ending of refugee resettlement in the United States. I think, logistically it's extremely complicated, and more than likely it would, there would still be budgetary obligations to the large resettlement organizations that do carry it out. And so it wouldn't abruptly end. What a Trump administration could do, and what seems to be the indication from things that have been introduced in Congress already, is that there would be some realignment to the regional apportionment of refugees around the world, and potentially more deference paid to states that want to express their displeasure with refugees being resettled there. 49 bills in state legislatures were introduced this year attempting to halt or interfere with refugee resettlement, my favorite of which was one in Florida that allowed the governor to use military force to keep refugees out. Yeah, seriously. But we could see a Trump administration that, or changes to the Refugee Act that permitted states to, in one form or another, say no. Doing that would make it very difficult for the U.S. to have a coherent refugee resettlement policy, which could interfere with us having a coherent foreign policy. We want to resettle refugees because we want other countries to resettle refugees, because we don't want Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey to be taking in millions of people and potentially further destabilizing the region. So, while we are indeed likely talking about, some serious reduction, extreme vetting, increased surveillance in the states, other, buildup of of law enforcement activity done in the name of counterterrorism around refugee communities, around Muslim, Arab American, South Asian communities generally. I don't think what we're going to see is a complete destruction of the refugee resettlement program.
I disagree with that. I think the refugee resettlement,
Right,
the
now
number
we're
of
gonna
folks
get ready
who
to
can
get something going here.
Well, I just think, refugee resettlement is really up to the executive in a lot of ways. The budget, not necessarily. But, if President Trump said, we're not going to accept any refugees, there's not a whole lot that I think you could really do about that. So, that's just my opinion. I don't know how.
Aracelis, you're stuck between those two. What?
No, I think, everything is possible. What I just always sit down and wonder what's going to happen first. Like, what is he really likely to pull the trigger on first? It seems like almost every group has been targeted, right? And so whether he can act on everything at one given time is probably unlikely. And he's already proven not to be able to pick his battles so great. And he's not even in office yet. But the reality is that, there is a lot of power around the presidency to be able to do a lot of these things. And so I'm really just wondering who's going to be the priority, right? DACA seems to be the low-hanging fruit because it's an executive order and can be easily reversed. But in some form or another, we're just going to have to wait and see what he's feeling pressured by, and like what he feels he's going to, what he has to comply to based on like everything that he said. So.
I just wanted to add, in addition to the mechanisms that Domenic discussed, one concern we have is that a Trump administration will invite friendly lawsuits and then use that as a basis for settlement terms that essentially allow a unilateral reversal of policies that may not be possible through simply, administrative procedures under the existing law. So that's one tactic that we think could be particularly alarming in the refugee context.
So I want to get two big questions in and then leave a good amount of time for question and answer for our audience who have been tremendously patient. And you can, if you want, you can really tie these two together. Let's go back to the title of this forum tonight is U.S. Immigration Policy, Where Do We Go From Here? So the real questions here are, how do we hold the new administration accountable to ensure that those who are already here, those who want to immigrate, those who may be undocumented are protected? And equally important, at least, is how can students, faculty, folks who are not in school, but folks who are working in the public policy area, law, social services, really most effectively organize and have a call to action. And it would be very, very helpful to hear from all of you and your perspectives. What do we do now, and how do we do it best?
So my background is in law, and so I approach these questions first and foremost as a lawyer. With a lot of the policies that are being put forth, quite frankly, we don't have great legal tools. With some of them we do, and we are going to fight every step of the way where we have a colorable cause of action. But when you talk about perhaps a unilateral decision to stop allowing refugees in at all, despite existing federal law. When you talk about some of the surveillance policies and some of the discriminatory registration policies, quite frankly, we start to quickly get into waters where I think the impeachment process is the sole check. Now, I am hoping that this administration turns out to simply talk big and not do much in practice. And it may be that we are looking at policies that are far less extreme than what is promised on the campaign trail. But to the extent we are dealing with policies where the president has a great deal of latitude and has the ability to act without congressional review and has the ability to basically avoid the jurisdiction of the courts, in that case, I think the midterm elections will be one of the most decisive, levers in the next 4 years. As for students, one thing I want to emphasize, I think we come together and we have these talks and we look at the importance of what a single person can do when they're the president, the scope of the federal power here. But when you are a student in a local community, the most powerful way to impact the people around you is to really stay local and vocal, to focus on smaller community groups that are active right here in the city, because there are so many organizations that could benefit from the involvement of just a few volunteers from SIPA who could dramatically increase their capacity with student activism. And there you have more power than you realize to affect change on a local level. So while it's important to be informed about what's going on in Washington, if you want to have the biggest impact possible, focus on the smallest community you can.
I want to second a lot of that. we have a tremendous task of informing our communities about their rights, developing the strategies to assert those rights, and to bring our communities together in their own self-defense. We need to take care of our people, and you shouldn't think that the entire task of facing the injustices to come is on you yourself. We need to figure out how to bring others in with us into the work that we have to do together. As a college student, the first foray into social justice work that I ever took was volunteering to pick up farm workers to go to their labor union meetings, and now it's a small thing, but it was a very important thing for them, and fight in their fight to improve the conditions in which they were working, and slowly you find more ways, little by little, to do more. So start small, and it's not on you alone.
So I'm probably going to talk from the perspective of a former SIPA alum, or of a SIPA alum. It's really important to get out of these four walls. It's great, your classrooms are great, that's awesome, that's what you came here to do. But it was a bit unfortunate when I was here just to see people not really venture out. You have these opportunities in January, you go during the summertime, you complete your capstone projects, and that's great. But a lot of the skills that you're working on right now are very applicable to especially small community-based organizations. MASA has grown a lot over the last couple of years, and I was doing MASA while I was a grad student here. It wasn't easy, but quite frankly, there was a lot of things that I was able to apply. The evaluation classes and performance measures, that was part of the way that we were able to build MASA and be able to attract more funding. This is immediate right now, but really the long-term sustainability of community-based organizations who are on the ground, who have the trust of the community, is really also important. If you want to get involved immediately, there's a lot of organizations on the ground who are also holding Know Your Rights sessions, who are helping in these big community events. Simple things like outreach, right? There's a big difference between posting in certain communities, posting an event and saying, come hear about your rights, then going on foot and talking to people and bringing that information back to the community organization and so that community organizations can have a proper response. So there's a lot of ways that students can get involved. It's really a matter of just recognizing that you guys already have a lot of the things that these organizations need, and also there's training available. There's all sorts of initiatives going on in New York City, and I think that it would be really, really some valuable experiences for you guys. The other thing that I will say is that we work with children and with families. The urgency around providing some sort of normalcy in their lives is important. That has huge effects on the way they're going to perform in school, whether parents are going to want to go to school. I mean, we work with a lot of schools, and the biggest issue is parents are afraid. Now, parents are afraid of doing a lot of things that we as an organization have tried to move forward with our communities. It's in seconds with this election was kind of destroyed. And so being able to volunteer in programs, we provide academic support. We have over 130 volunteers that work with children from 5 years old all the way to 18. And so I think also if you have those certain skills and patience to work with families, and you may also have a social work background, there is a lot of room for you to support. We have volunteers coming from, I think it's NYU, that are going to provide a weekly support group for children, and they're going to use art therapy. So if you have a passion, you're in school, there's other ways to get involved and to get real life experiences that will be really meaningful to New Yorkers right now.
I would say two things. One, I think it's important to think about all of the different things that could happen around immigration in a Trump presidency. I think Albert is right. A lot of the things that he said on the campaign trail are completely false and based on misconceptions. Some of that stuff is not going to be achievable, but some of it is. And he's going to face some political pressure to live up to some of those promises. Already we've heard some of the anti-immigrant folks, they're really hate groups, folks like Numbers USA, which is a hate group. It's not a legitimate immigrant organization, but they said if he doesn't reverse DACA, that's going to be a knife in our backs. That's what he said. So there is going to be a lot of pressure from the alt-right, from the Breitbart News crowd, watching him, saying, are you backtracking on your positions or not? I do think there are a couple things that are really pressing. DACA, very pressing. He could immediately reverse that policy. I don't think he will. But still, I think it's at risk, and we can't simply let that up to chance. The refugee resettlement program, again, he has a lot of power over that, especially with the new numbers coming in. He can, and in my view, I think he can put a stop to it if he wanted to. He has a lot of latitude on how he's going to handle new refugees coming to the United States. Some of the other stuff like deportations, right? He is going to try to make good on that. But it's going to take time. It's going to take time. You need a congressional appropriation to hire all those, to triple the ICE agents or whatever it is going to do. It's going to take time to do that. It's going to take budget monies to do that. So that's not going to happen immediately. And the border wall, or now he's calling it the border fence, that's going to take time as well.
And money.
And money.
45 million.
And billion. It's going to cost a lot of money.
Sure.
And in some ways, that's a negotiating chip for the Democrats. Right. And it's a question of whether they want to do that. Do you want to trade the money to build a border wall for potentially something like the DREAM Act? That is a legitimate conversation, a strategy conversation that I guarantee you is being had in the halls of Congress right now. But that's not going to happen immediately. That's going to take a little bit of time to percolate. So there's immediate threats and risks, and there's stuff that's going to happen down the pike, but we should be understanding what is going to be at risk immediately. In terms of getting involved in organizing, I would simply echo a lot of what folks said. I would say that we have 175 member agencies, and it's the smallest ones that are often doing the best work and could actually use the most help. And if you want to volunteer, I would look on our website. We have ways to volunteer, and we can connect you actually up with member agencies. But I think there's a chance and an opportunity to act. On December 18th is actually International Migrants Day. It's going to be a big day of action across the entire country, where we think actually a number of different mayors and other folks are going to step forward and say, count me in as a sanctuary city. So I would encourage you, as Aracelis said, to act beyond these four walls. I think that's really important. And the final thing that I would say is, one thing that's clear from this election is that there's a lot of people who voted for Donald Trump knowing his immigration stance, and in fact, because of his immigration stances. We have to face that. That's a reality. And there are people among that crowd who are xenophobic, racist, and we're not going to reach them, and we should not try to reach them. But there's also a lot of people who may not have a lot of immigrants in their area, or who may have seen a very rapid influx, and they don't know what to do about it. Their local pizzeria that they've gone to for 15 years, that pizzeria is now a pupuseria. And they don't know how to act, they don't know how to react. It's an emotional thing, and race is involved, and it's very complex. But the fact of the matter is that the only messages that they are hearing is that immigrants take their jobs, which is wrong, that immigrants commit crimes, again, wrong, or that immigrants suck up resources. These are all wrong. These are all mistruths. But if we are not getting our message out to these people, native-born white Americans living in suburban or rural areas, then we are going to be back in the same spot that we are in today. And so I think that we, as the immigrant rights movement, need to do something we're not very good at, and that's to reach beyond our base. And I think that is something that you all, I think, can be tremendously helpful in, helping us come up with strategies, helping be the foot soldiers on the ground, thinking about ways in which we can actually figure out how to reach some of those folks in some of those communities, because that may not be the best thing that immigrants themselves can do.
Well, Stephen, you gave me a perfect segue to not only the Q&A, but also that you're really talking about organized coalitions. And the words of Dr. King in his letter from a Birmingham jail could not be more significant or important. And when we talk about injustice anywhere as a threat to justice everywhere, this is an organizing moment. This is another rights time. And whether it was civil rights, LGBT rights, women's rights, human rights in general, the various immigrant communities partnered with African Americans, Latinos, the LGBT community, women's organizations, and many, many others. It is my personal belief that when some of this language is used, quite possibly in other less public sessions and environments, you could substitute any number of us here in this room for the person being talked about out in public. And we need to just recognize that, acknowledge that, but then try to do something about it. And so coalition building is significantly important in this regard. With that, we're going to open the floor. Just maybe give us your name if you have a directed question. Let us know who it's for. Otherwise, the panel will try to address it. But please step up, and we want to leave some good time for this.
Hello.
Thomas.
My name is Thomas. I'm a second-year SIPA student. Thank you very much for your time and for sharing your stories and insights. My question is for Albert. As a non-lawyer, could you explain a little bit more about friendly lawsuits and how that tactic might potentially be used?
So this is when you have an individual who is in a governmental role, there's certain ways you can go about making policy. There's the Administrative Procedures Act that says if you want to pass a new rule that says X, you must go through the following steps. The difficulty comes in when a public interest group, let's say, files a lawsuit, and then there is a question of whether the agency is in compliance with the law. They will say, you broke the law through through a given policy. And what can happen on occasions is that a settlement is reached between the agency and the plaintiffs that actually just enables them to make policies that otherwise would have been much more laborious to implement. For example, the incoming head of the EPA had previously accused the agency he now will be running of using this tactic to reach settlements with environmentalist groups to enact regulations that would otherwise not have been possible. Because to enact the regulation, you would have to go through this lengthy process, but through the settlement, you could, in the guise of settling liability, create a new rule.
I would take that one step further. The question wasn't for me, but there are times, depending on the circumstance, where a government agency actually wants to be sued. And you don't want to settle because you really do believe the law is on your side. You don't want to go through the regulatory process. You actually want to be sued because you believe that you're going to win in court, and then you have an actual court opinion that is in fact enforcing what you wanted to do in the first place. It is, of course, a completely twisted logic, but there are circumstances where you would actually want to be sued and then say,
They made me do it.
got a court order,
Yeah.
this is what I got to do.
Yeah. So yeah, it's rather than, I wanted to create this new rule, it's, the judge is forcing me to do it. It's this or go to jail. So yeah.
Right. Another question?
Hi, thank you for this panel. I'm glad I came from Queens to listen to you guys speak. I volunteer a lot with CUNY, Citizenship Now, and my question is, you spoke about DACA and DAPA, they can be reversed. What about TPS?
I think TPS is at risk.
Can we
Get an explanation?
Yeah, so temporary protected status, it's often conferred to a group of people Normally, it's limited to a particular country or countries and who were left during a particular time. So, like people fleeing Haiti after the earthquake, or people coming from El Salvador after as a result of the Civil War.
Yeah. I think that when you look at what people like Chris Kobach have talked about in terms of TPS, their goal is to put the T back into TPS, to make it temporary. So there are a number of different TPS programs that are out there. For example, for Nepal, for some West African countries, for Haiti. I think we have to be prepared for the possibility that those programs are going to end under this administration. And again, it's something that I think it's the Department of State has a lot of control over. But there's only so much pressure that Congress can bear on that.
In other words, somebody who has CPS right now, can they be deported, or what happens to their status?
If it becomes really temporary, and they say this is the date by which
Right.
It's going to end, then at that point, the folks' status where they're going to be able to be protected from deportation, ability to work legally, that's going to end.
I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, the Department of Homeland Security said that it was going to resume deporting Haitians, and then after there was outrage, they reversed. But yeah, it's totally at the behest of the executive branch.
Questions?
Thank you again for coming here to speak with us today. I had a question. Something that we didn't cover are the economic implications of mass deportation and the effect that can have in various states, industries, whether it be, agriculture, service industry, other areas of the economy. I was wondering if one of you could speak briefly about the economic implications of what we've been talking about.
I think the economic implication is going to be huge. The cost of tripling the number of ICE agents is obviously going to be significant, but the loss of, folks who are working, right, and are filling actually really critical key jobs here in New York City and other places, it's going to be significant. I don't think that farms will be that affected, I think largely because of the political clout that they have and with Republicans, which is ironic because if in fact you wanted to deport large numbers of undocumented folks and you wanted to do so somewhat quote unquote efficiently, then you would do so at farms. But I think the political blowback of going to farms, rounding up farm workers would be so tremendous, particularly from folks that the Republicans see as allies. I don't think you're going to see that. So they're going to resort more to hanging out outside courthouses and figuring out whether they can pick up people off who are in the criminal justice system, because that's the other way that you can do that. But I also do think that you're going to see continued deportations where there are home invasions, where there are raids, things like that. Workplace rates will almost certainly go up.
Right. A number of industries would possibly be on the verge of shutting down if this actually went forward, which I think it also is not only crazy, but it's going to be very, very difficult to do this. But it creates an environment of fear that can be debilitating in and of itself.
That's right.
Some folks might be afraid to go to work, which is destabilizing not only for them, but also for the particular business. So a lot of ramifications here. They don't understand that or don't care. Question?
Yeah, hello. Thank you for your time and the expertise. All the intel is very useful. My name is Ernesto. I'm a second-year student here at SIPA. I come from Mexico, and right now many of the concerns that I'm having, all the conversations I'm having with my friends and the international students are people who are already getting job offers or were planning to stay here, or what about the OPT or H-1B1, like visas? How long would that take to be reversed? How I don't know, in terms of executive orders and logistically speaking, I don't know. Like my mom and my sister told me, "Are you crazy? How come you're still considering staying over there in a hostile environment?" But what if? Like what would it take?
You know, I would say in the very short term, you know, the wheels of bureaucracy are not going to grind to a halt. They're going to kind of proceed as they go, you know, as they're on the course that they're on for at least a little while until people, you know, get in that, you know, have a different ideological bent and are, you know, are going to try to change things. You know, on the specific issue of you know, employment-based visas and like OPT, you know, I think it would be, you know, a while before they got into legislation and policy adjustment in order to interfere with you know, like do it, you know, before they could do something like get rid of OPT altogether. You know, I don't think it would be something, you know, that would happen, you know, you know, in the first 100 days of a Trump administration. And I think the politics around it would actually be quite bad.
I actually think that the Chris Kobachs of the world, and they're the ones who are going to be running the show in DHS, their stated goal is to decrease illegal, not just illegal immigration, but legal immigration. And they're hell bent on doing so. So it may not happen immediately, but I think, you know, and the very first thing that Donald Trump said around immigration after he won the election was around H-1Bs. It wasn't around the wall. It wasn't about, you know, illegals or anything like that. It was about H-1B abuse. And this is actually something that I think is a real split within the Republican Party, because the business folks obviously don't want to see that. They want to see expanded use of the H-1Bs. But that's not who Donald Trump is beholden to right now. He's beholden to the Chris Kobachs and the Breitbart folks. And they want to see immigration, legal immigration, drastically reduced. I mean, I think the parallel here is, and really when you look at this globally, the parallel is like the 1920s, right? I mean, up till the 1920s, as I mentioned earlier, you saw huge amounts of immigration to the United States coming from first Western Europe, but then more Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, right? And then again, you had a big backlash where a lot of people said, all these immigrants, they're, you know, taking our jobs and committing crimes and they're dirty and all this kind of stuff. And in the 20s, you saw drastic reductions in immigration that were not lifted until the 1960s. And this is part of a global retrenchment where you saw a lot of populist movements rise up around the globe, including in Nazi Germany. We may be entering that phase right now. We may be entering a phase where we're coming out of a period where you had large flows of capital and people all over the globe, and people are pulling back right now. And so you may see drastic reductions. You know, you see what's happening in Europe. We may be entering a phase for, who knows, I have no idea exactly how long, where people are saying, you know what, we want to close our borders. We want to control our borders. And what that means is we don't want to see more immigration, whether it is over the border or whether it's legal immigration. I think there is a lot of populist sentiment around that, and we cannot avoid that.
And one thing that I wanted to say in terms of like students and your next steps is we have heard of cases where programs like Fulbright have been sending statements out to both current students and just in general advising that things may change. And so there are people right now that are under some of these programs that are also on a waiting, you know, game to see whether their visas are going to be totally eliminated or whether they're going to be given some time to complete their programs. So that it is a reality, and I would, you know, highly suggest that people stay on top of that. But I also think that it's going to matter by country. And we work with a lot of people from Mexico, but there is a lot of talk around like it becoming even harder to get even visiting visas to come, you know, to the United States. And so, again, what the priorities are and what they're going to pull, you know, first, or what they're going to want to accomplish is still up in the air.
Look, there are a lot of dark possibilities, and for those of you who have not read about the, quote, Mexican repatriation of the 1930s, I would suggest that you look it up after this talk to see just how bad this country can be on the question of removing individuals, in that case, citizens as well. But there are countervailing pressures, including in the Republican Party, that I think will make the them less likely to push for some of the more dramatic things we've talked about in the H-1B context. It's not certain. There are certainly people in power right now who want to massively reduce legal immigration and all channels of legal immigration, but those are not the only people in ascendancy. And I think it is unclear at this moment how those conflicting pressures will play out. So obviously there's reason for concern, but I personally, I'm not sure if it will be nearly as bad as we've been talking about just now.
I would only add to this that, and based on, so I agree with everything that was said down the other end. We talk about the 30s, 20s and 30s, but the one additional element that now gets added on top is the constant fear and threat regarding terrorism.
That's right.
Terrorism. So that is another layer that's added on this that then starts to block out other rational thought, because folks want to talk about Paris, Brussels, and San Bernardino, and Orlando, and all of these examples, ignoring the fact that many of the individuals involved in those acts were actually American citizens,
That's right.
born here, raised here, educated here, and did their own acts. But then there's always a reference made back to, their parents, their grandparents, their great-grandparents. They must have come from somewhere else. Well, everyone here came from somewhere else. But that part of this argument can overwhelm any other rational thought, because we have all of this fear going through our own American society, which is real, but then is exploited. So, Damien, I'm sorry.
Thank you so much. So my question, I think, stepping back, is more about immigration policy generally. So Stephen, you spoke a lot about how we have an irrational legal immigration system, which going through it, I think I agree. But I'm wondering what you advocate for in terms of like the immigration reform, if there's like 2 or 3 things, top things that you advocate for in terms of legal immigration and how that should change.
So what I'm going to say is not actually like orthodoxy, so please don't quote me or tweet me. I think that as a general principle, right, if you're thinking about, we're thinking about fences, right? If the gates are too narrow, then people are going to go over the fence. But if you have a gate that's wide, if you have a walkway and pathway that's wide, then people are not going to do that. If you're able to process backlogs properly, and and if we have a commitment, I think for immigration reform, there's got to be a commitment to deal with the backlog, and that's a matter of political will. I also think that we need to be thinking about the channels of immigration that are out there and thinking about how they can be as broad as possible, because I think that's a big driver of immigration without papers. So I think that's a key piece. I think one thing that's clear is we need to think about how we're going to deal with the undocumented immigrant population. Sticking our heads in the sand is not a solution. But that is a solution, unfortunately, for the Republican Party so far, and it seems to be working for them, because they're not seeing the real full political costs of that. But we've got to deal with that. It's not a good situation either for the undocumented immigrants who are here, most of whom are here just to find a better life for themselves, just like generations before them. But by keeping them in the shadows, it's a corrosive element to our society, and and if we don't deal with it, then we're always going to deal with these people in our society who just simply, their minds go blank when you talk about undocumented immigrants. They say illegals, we got to get rid of them. So we've got to deal with that situation, figure out a path to citizenship, a path to legalization, whatever that looks like. And then finally, I would say, we need to think about immigration reform as a forward-thinking piece. If it's just about correcting the sins of the past, then we're going to keep on repeating, we're going to make mistakes that mess us up for the future. So we need to be thinking about, and I actually believe really strongly in this, when we're thinking about reform, we also need to think about integration as a key piece of that. When folks come in, how do we make sure that they are going to be in the best position they can be to add more of their value to society? So I think whatever immigration reform gets passed, it needs to have an immigrant integration piece in there as well.
And I just want to add a little piece to that. Even as we saw with the DACA experience, I think a lot of people have been advocating for some of these programs and making, you know, deals to at least get part of the undocumented community documented. But one of the things, piggybacking off of the integration piece, is that at first, once the DACA students or the DACA individuals got DACA, what was the plan afterwards, right? We had people who were undocumented, who are now documented, who can go through now the healthcare system, who can get pay their taxes, who can have access to other things, and I think that we can also learn from, not only prepare for the fight for immigration reform and how do we achieve those policies, but also how do we make it as safe and easy for them to integrate into mainstream life. There are people in our office, like, how do you fill this? How do you fill out a W-9, right, or a W-4? How do you, and so it's also about facilitating life for immigrants. And the other piece is, I think that New York City especially has done a good job, and nationally, advocates have been strategizing around how to make it safer locally, how to make it safer statewide, and how to have a national approach. And I think, everyone has to continue to do that. Unfortunately, there are some cities that seem to be friendlier than others. But I think that in the meantime, it's still a good strategy. But now we have to also look back from some of the things that were implemented, and how do we learn from that?
I want to add just, two small things that I think often get overlooked when, we talk about reforming the system. One is the extent to which the due process rights of immigrants are circumscribed within our current system. As I mentioned earlier, we have this system of detainers where an immigration agent sends a request to a local law enforcement to hold someone for them. They send this at the start of investigation. They don't know the status of that person. Over 800 times within a 4-year period, U.S. citizens were held on detainers. And this amounts to a systemic violation of people's Fourth Amendment rights. We have a case before the Supreme Court at the moment asking that people have an individualized bond determination after 6 months in immigration detention. People often spend months and sometimes years fighting their case. People who have very strong ties to the United States, they have family here. People with weaker ties would rather accept deportation than languish in an immigration detention center for years. I think it's really vital to defend and expand due process rights for immigrants within our current system, to disentangle our criminal justice system and our immigration enforcement system. And the other piece that I wanted to bring up is the border. Often border militarization is seen as kind of the sacrificial lamb for legalization programs or other good things. And I think it's worth just making it clear what a Wild West border enforcement literally and figuratively a bit is when it comes to due process rights. You have the expanded ability to utilize racial profiling within 100 miles of the border. You have very few of the good police practices, the good police accountability measures that local law enforcement use, including data on stops, recording incidents of use of force. This is the kind of stuff that Border Patrol does not do at all. They get away with things like shooting children. Like we have another case of a child who was shot through the fence by a Border Patrol agent. I think it's, there are very good and important things to do with immigration reform, but some other flaws, some very major flaws within our system can often be left out of that conversation. I just wanted to throw them out here.
I just want to quickly respond to that question, to a point you made earlier, which is that terrorism tends to swamp the narrative. And I think that for 15 years now, we've seen a willingness in the political narrative to accept the trade-off of liberty for the promise of security. And this is nothing new. I mean, you can go to Pericles' funeral oration and see a discussion of whether you'll let our enemies profit from the openness of our city. And there becomes, at a certain point, a need to change the discussion going forward. Yes, it is important to point out that immigrants are vital and vibrant and an indispensable component of our country, but we have to rebut the very premise that security alone is enough to justify the deterioration of our moral requirement to be a country that accepts refugees, a country that is open to all, a country that will really enable people to come and build a life. Those are values that are just as important as the security values that so often swamp the narrative.
So Mayor Nutter, I actually had a question,
Okay, sure.
if you don't mind
I just
asking.
want to make sure, I mean, I don't know if this is a political thing. We've only had questions from the left.
That's
And I mean, I want to make sure
What
the
does that have
right,
to say
you know,
about it? So I just had a quick question. And I'd love to hear your perspective as mayor of a major city, and you were in the thick of things, dealing with a significant immigrant population, dealing with all the challenges, federal law enforcement, local, and one of the first things that you did in your term was to establish the sanctuary city policy. But then a couple days before the end of your term, you reversed that policy. So I'm curious to hear about your reasons for that.
Sure. Let me try to give you the short version of this story. And again, I was trying not to be a real-life participant. So the Department of Homeland Security initially had a program called Secure Communities. Some of you may remember that. It was very broad. It was pretty much chasing after everybody who was undocumented. The only time in my entire career, or my 7 years that I served with President Obama, during his presidency, the only time I ever said to President Barack Obama that I would not do something that his administration was putting forward was with regard to secure communities, because I said to the President and to Secretary Johnson that the program was overbroad, it was a complete waste of resources, you were not going after the right people, and I think we need to acknowledge that the vast majority of folks who are here are either not breaking the law, other than being undocumented, which that's not at the top of my mind. They haven't hurt anybody, they haven't killed anybody, raped anybody, they're not involved in drug trafficking, et cetera, et cetera. But that there are some people who are here, who are undocumented, who are also criminals. And so my blanket position is I'm not for criminals, whether homegrown or you got here 2 weeks ago. And I said that we will not cooperate with regard to secure communities because it is overly broad and a complete waste of resources, and we're not accomplishing what we want to accomplish. But I said to the President and the Secretary, if you change this program and limit and focus who you're going after, I will engage in a conversation with you about what Philadelphia might do under those circumstances. We spent nearly a year negotiating with the Department of Homeland Security and ICE for what we would do in a new program. They got rid of secure communities, not because of me. There were a bunch of us involved in this effort. They scrapped that program, I believe in November of 2014, by a directive by Secretary Johnson. They created the Priority Enforcement Program, also known as PEP, and then went about negotiating city by city. Secure communities was one size fits all, it was blanket. We negotiated that under limited circumstances. If you said to the city of Philadelphia, do you have Stephen Choi in custody, who had already been arrested for some other crime? Stephen Choi, who has already been convicted of murder, rape, sexual assault, all felonies, human trafficking, drug trafficking, gang activity. Will you let us know when he is to be released? That was our program. people who had already been convicted previously of felonies, the limited set of circumstances, and they wanted to know by person, had to tell us why, and had a warrant for them. Is that person in custody by name, and will you tell us when they'll be released? And under those set of circumstances, that was why we changed a component of the executive order that I issued. And it was late in my tenure. It took us a year to negotiate it. If we had negotiated earlier, I would have signed it earlier. But it was when it was. And because I made a commitment to President Obama and Secretary Johnson, if you get rid of a program that I don't agree with, change it, limit it, and focus your resources on criminals, I would then come back and respond with a new executive order. That's why I did what I did.
Thank you. That's very enlightening.
Sure. It was reversed by my successor on the first day. So,
I'm aware of that.
different set of circumstances. So, sorry for the long answer, but that's the, yes, sir. From the right.
My name is Jean-Paul, and I'm a second-year student. I also run a small nonprofit organization. But my question is, what do you think nonprofit organization can do to help, like, whether it's a small organization or a big organization like the United Nations can do to help out with this situation?
What can small CBOs do in a situation like this, or?
Yes, to help.
It depends on the community that you serve, right? And I think what is really important is before we started doing anything, we had this experience in January where Central American families were being targeted for deportation, right? And so we had learned from that experience in January, but again, what we didn't want to do is think that we knew our community and what they needed without asking them. And so I think it's very important to kind of set priorities. Small CBOs do not have a lot of resources. And so you really have to respond in a way that is going to be helpful to your community. And without talking to your community, it's really them who should determine what is in the help that they need. And still, we found that people especially wanted to know, and similar to this audience, what is Donald Trump talking about? Is it realistic? And that's what they wanted to know. And so that was the first session that we did with them. The second one was about their rights. Okay, if something happens, how can I protect myself? Do I have any rights? And so we addressed that. And tomorrow we're having an emergency planning session. We work with children and families. It is important for them to know who they can leave their children with. What is the reality? And so we're bringing someone who does family law and who works with the family court system. What kind of documents do you need? So I think it really depends on, and if you have the resources to do that. We fortunately have built, over the years, being part of the coalition and being part of other initiatives, a network of support, and we don't do this work alone. And so we have a lot of partners. But it really, I think, depends on your capacity and what your community needs. And some people might, say, I just need to be connected to a lawyer. Yeah. And that's what you listen to, and that's what you do.
Last comments. Tiffany runs a very tight ship. Tiffany. Anything else? You guys want to say some last things?
I just want to add on that point, the smallest organizations generally can act the quickest and with the greatest legitimacy from the people they serve. And really, small organizations are on the front lines of this work every day. They have been for years. And, yes, it's important to scale up with partnerships and networks and other coalition partners, but, small groups have the ability to change lives in a way that your clients will never forget. So for those of you who aren't involved in organizations, who have time, I urge you, really, leave these four walls like we've been talking about. You go out into this community and find, small organizations you can help, augment their mission.
Stephen?
Last thing that I would quickly say is, in 2004, in the November 2004 elections, the Republicans swept the elections. George Bush was reelected, and the Republicans controlled the House and the Senate. And 1 year later, the Republican House passed the Sensenbrenner bill, which is known as one of the most anti-immigrant pieces of legislation ever to come out from the United States House of Representatives. It was a dark time. And yet, 1 year later, you saw the greatest groundswell of support ever in this country's history for immigrants, where you had millions of people out on the streets. And so I think we all sit here and we think, you know, the apocalypse is nigh, and we're going to see a lot of really dark, terrible things that happen. But at the same time, I think there's an opportunity to think about how we can engage, and that really means everybody here and everybody outside of these walls, because there is precedent when we didn't have any political power, but we managed to make an incredible statement about the need to respect and to empower immigrants in 2006. I'm hopeful we can see something like that.
Aracelis? Final comment?
I just want to reiterate, you need to get out of these four walls. And that we're always happy to connect as an organization with students. And just like Stephen Choi said, to redirect you, he has a larger base. It depends on what you guys want to do and what kind of communities you want to serve. But we're happy as an organization to take you guys on as volunteers, but also to connect you with other things that you might have interest in. And good luck to all you guys.
Domenic?
Si se puede.
Okay.
Really, I know the task we have before us looks extremely daunting. You have a single party that is hostile to immigrants, that controls every branch of the federal government and the majority of state legislatures, and is able to enact its agenda very quickly, and it's an agenda that is hostile to our communities. The issues that face our communities are not, simply specific to the experience of an immigrant. They affect all communities of color. All of the issues that we face of being over-policed, harassed, surveilled, having our voting rights circumscribed, being able to marry or being able to adopt, being able to be served in a restaurant while being LGBT. These are the times when our purpose is the most clear. This is when we're able to get in touch with to get in touch with the reason that we got started doing this work in the first place. Why you were drawn why you were drawn to SIPA, why you were drawn to trying to make our society function better than it does now. So I think be in touch with yourself, be in touch with what your community needs, and hold on to that, and let's get to work.
I want to thank SIPA Students of Color, SSOC, the SIPA Diversity Task Force, and certainly most importantly, the Dean Seminar Series on Race and Poverty, Dean Jano, Dean Parente, who is still here with us. Can we give all of them a big, big round of applause? And I think my final word would be, and this is not particularly original because we know this one, but I think what we heard tonight was we should have these global thoughts about all the things that we want to do. Let's act locally while we're out trying to save the world. Let's make sure we take care of our little part of it. Great conversation tonight. Let's go save the world. Thanks.